The massive chamber stretched out like a silver dome under the artificial stars of the Galactic Council Station. Representatives from 47 different worlds sat in their designated sections, each species maintaining the careful distance that diplomacy required. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime as dozens of languages filled the space with nervous chatter. Captain Jake Morrison adjusted his dress uniform and tried not to stare at the incredible sight before him. 3 years of being part of the galactic community still felt like a dream. The Vraxian delegates with their crystal-like skin caught the light and scattered it in rainbow patterns. The tall Selenians moved with fluid grace, their pale blue forms elegant even in the formal setting. Karathi representatives clicked and whistled to each other in their native tongue, their thick shells gleaming under the chamber lights. Lieutenant Lisa Harper sat beside Jake in the human observation section, a small area that had been added to the council chamber only recently. She leaned over and whispered, "Any idea why they called us here?" The message just said emergency session and mandatory attendance for all species representatives. Jake shook his head. Emergency sessions were rare, and humans had never been required to attend one before. Their small delegation usually handled routine trade negotiations and colonial permits. This felt different, more serious, and the way other species kept glancing at their section made him uncomfortable. Ambassador Zik Tar of the Vraxian Confederacy rose from the central podium, his crystalline voice cutting through the chamber noise like a blade. The translation implants in Jake's ear converted the harmonic tones into clear English. The Council recognizes the gravity of this emergency session. We gather to address a matter of galactic security that affects all member species. The chamber fell silent. Jake noticed how the Karathi delegates had pulled back into their shells slightly, and even the usually confident Selenians seemed tense. Something was very wrong. Over the past several months, Zektar continued, incidents involving human military forces have created widespread concern among our member worlds. Reports have reached us from 17 different systems describing encounters that have left lasting psychological impact on various species. Jake felt his stomach drop. Lisa's hand found his arm, her grip tight. They both knew what this was about, even if the details were still classified. The Nightfall incident had been kept quiet in human space, but apparently word had spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The behavior patterns exhibited by human forces, another delegate added, this one a tall Selenian with flowing robes, represent a fundamental departure from accepted galactic warfare protocols. Their methods suggest a level of psychological manipulation that threatens the stability of interspecies relations. The word stung because Jake knew they weren't entirely wrong. Human military doctrine had always emphasized adaptability and psychological advantage. What worked against human enemies apparently had very different effects on alien minds. The problem was that nobody had realized just how different those effects would be. A Karathi delegate spoke next, his shell-muffled voice carrying across the chamber. The incident aboard the pirate vessel Nightfall has been analyzed by our best military psychologists. The human boarding parties employed tactics that can only be described as terror warfare. 17 seasoned pirates surrendered without resistance. The psychological profiles of the survivors suggest trauma comparable to exposure to biological warfare agents. Jake wanted to stand up and explain, to tell them that human soldiers had simply used standard psychological pressure tactics, but protocol kept him seated. The observation section was for listening, not participating. He could only watch as species after species spoke about humanity's unnatural combat methods. The humans fight like creatures from our oldest nightmares, whispered a delegate Jake didn't recognize, though his implant translated the words clearly. They move through ships like ghosts, appear where they should not be, and somehow know exactly how to break an enemy's will without even firing a weapon. The debate went on for what felt like hours. Jake heard story after story, each one describing human actions through the lens of alien psychology. A diplomatic negotiation where a human captain had calmly explained the consequences of hostile action was described as psychological terrorism. A rescue mission where human forces had used stealth and misdirection was called supernatural infiltration tactics. The worst part was that Jake could see the fear in their eyes. These weren't lies or exaggerations. From their perspective, humans really did fight like demons. Their natural adaptability, their ability to think outside established patterns, their talent for understanding and exploiting enemy psychology, all of these normal human traits appeared supernatural to species that had never developed such abilities. The evidence is clear, Zektar announced as the debate wound down. Humanity represents an unpredictable element in galactic affairs. Their methods of conflict resolution are incompatible with civilized warfare and pose a threat to the psychological well-being of other species. The formal vote came swiftly. Resolution 2847X was read aloud, its legal language making Jake's blood run cold. No formal military alliances with Earth. No joint economic ventures involving human security forces. No technological exchanges that could enhance human tactical capabilities. Essentially, humanity was being quarantined. One by one, the delegates cast their votes. The Karathi voted yes immediately. The Vraxians followed suit. Even the Selenians, who had helped establish the first human colonies, voted in favor after a long pause that suggested internal debate, not 40-7 species. 47 yes votes. Not a single abstention. Jake watched in stunned silence as his species was formally declared too dangerous for normal galactic relations. The irony was bitter. Humans had worked so hard to prove they belonged in the galactic community, only to discover that what made them human also made them terrifying to everyone else. As the session concluded, Jake caught fragments of conversation from other delegates. The translation implants worked automatically, turning alien languages into whispered English in his ear. The ghost ship tactics, someone said. Psychological warfare beyond anything we've seen, said another. They don't just defeat enemies. They break their minds. Lisa stood beside him as the chamber began to empty. Jake, what do we do now? How do we go home and tell Earth that the entire galaxy is afraid of us? Jake looked around the chamber one more time, seeing the careful way. Other species avoided even looking in their direction. Fear was written in every alien posture, every hurried exit, every nervous glance toward the human section. I don't know, he said finally, but we better figure it out fast. Being the most feared species in the galaxy wasn't exactly part of humanity's expansion plan. They left the chamber together, two humans walking alone through corridors filled with aliens who stepped aside to let them pass. Not out of respect, Jake realized, but out of fear. Somehow, without meaning to, humanity had become the monster under the galactic bed. The worst part was that they still didn't fully understand why. Commander Alex Kane stood on the bridge of the UEC Defender and watched the pirate ship drift in the darkness of space. The vessel called Nightfall had been a problem for merchant ships in this sector for months, and finally someone had decided to do something about it. The engagement had lasted only 20 minutes, but those 20 minutes would change how the entire galaxy saw humanity. The pirate ship looked harmless now, its weapons disabled and engines dead. But Alex knew that inside that converted Zelanian freighter were at least 30 pirates from different species, plus an unknown number of hostages. Intelligence reports suggested they had captured 2 human colonists along with several alien civilians during their last raid. Boarding parties ready, Commander, Sergeant Maria Santos reported from her position near the airlock. Her voice was calm and professional, but Alex could hear the tension underneath. This would be humanity's first major boarding action against a mixed alien crew, and nobody was quite sure what to expect. Alex had studied the ship's layout during their approach. The nightfall was typical of converted freighters, with long corridors, multiple levels, and plenty of places for defenders to set up ambushes. Standard galactic military doctrine called for overwhelming force and direct assault, but Alex had different ideas. "Remember the briefing," he told his boarding teams over. "The comm system. These aren't human pirates. Different species react to stress in different ways. Use that knowledge. Make them think, make them worry, make them wonder what's coming next." The first boarding pods attached to the Nightfall's hull with metallic clanks that echoed through both ships. But instead of immediately cutting through the airlocks, the human teams waited. They used their sensors to map out where the pirates were positioned, identified the ship's critical systems, and planned their approach with careful precision. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez led the first team through a maintenance airlock that the pirates probably didn't even know existed. His soldiers moved through the ship's service tunnels like they had been born there, using their smaller size and natural flexibility to navigate spaces that larger alien species couldn't access. A psychological warfare began immediately. Rodriguez's team disabled the lights in sections of the ship, not all at once, but in patterns that suggested movement. They triggered emergency alarms in empty compartments, making the pirates think they were under attack from multiple directions. Most importantly, they left signs of their presence without actually engaging. A Karathi pirate named Vextalk was the first to discover what the humans were doing. He found his personal weapon dismantled and laid out in neat pieces on his bunk, along with a note written in his own language that simply said, "We were here." The note shouldn't have been possible, because humans weren't supposed to know Karathi writing. But there it was. Word spread through the pirate crew like a disease. The humans weren't just boarding their ship. They were inside their heads. How? Did they know where each pirate slept? How did they know which weapons belonged to whom? How did they learn to write in languages they had never encountered before? Maria Santos led the second boarding team through the main cargo bay, but instead of engaging the pirates waiting there, her soldiers simply vanished into the ship's ventilation system. The pirates found themselves guarding an empty room while sounds of movement echoed through the walls around them. Footsteps in the ceiling, voices in languages they didn't recognize, and the constant feeling that they were being watched. The truth was much simpler than the pirates imagined. Human soldiers had spent the last 3 years studying every alien species they encountered. They learned languages not because they were planning psychological warfare, but because understanding other cultures was part of human nature. They moved through tight spaces because human evolution had made them adaptable. They planned complex operations because human military training emphasized flexibility over rigid doctrine. But to the pirates, it seemed like magic. A Vraxian pirate leader named Sektar tried to rally his crew by setting up a defensive position in the ship's central corridor. His plan was sound according to standard galactic tactics, but he hadn't counted on dealing with humans who didn't follow standard tactics. Instead of attacking the position directly, the human team simply went around it. They emerged from maintenance. Hatches behind the defensive line appeared in compartments that should have been sealed, and somehow managed to disable the ship's internal sensors without triggering any alarms. Sektar found himself commanding a defensive position that was defending against nothing while enemies materialized. Throughout the rest of his ship, the breaking point came when Danny Rodriguez's team reached the hostage compartment. Instead of immediately rescuing the prisoners, they left another note, this one in multiple languages, including perfect Vraxian script. The message was simple. Your hostages are now under our protection. Surrender, and you will be treated according to galactic law. Continue fighting and face the consequences. What the pirates didn't understand was that the note represented standard human psychological operations. The message was designed to make them think about their situation, to realize that continuing to fight was pointless, and to offer them a way out that didn't involve dying. It was actually quite humane by human standards, but the pirate crew saw something different. They saw an enemy that could appear anywhere, knew everything about them personally, and was offering them mercy from a position of absolute power. Combination of fear and relief broke their will to fight. 17 pirates surrendered without firing another shot. They emerged from their hiding places with their hands raised, their weapons abandoned, their eyes wide with a fear that went beyond normal combat stress. The remaining crew members were found huddled in the ship's central chamber, some of them catatonic with terror. The rescued hostages were confused by what they saw. The human soldiers who had seemed so terrifying to the pirates were calm, professional, and actually quite gentle with both the rescued civilians and the surrendering pirates. There was no brutality, no revenge, just efficient military procedure, but the damage was already done. The pirates who were taken into custody told stories that spread through every criminal network in the galaxy. They spoke of humans who moved, like ghosts, who knew their deepest fears, who could break their will without even trying. The stories grew with each telling, becoming more and more supernatural. Alex Kane filed his after-action report with typical military precision, noting the successful rescue of all hostages and the capture of the entire pirate crew with 0 casualties on either side. He considered it a textbook example of how superior tactics and psychological pressure could achieve victory without violence. He had no idea that his textbook operation had just made humanity the most feared species in the galaxy. Dr. Helen White stared at the data streaming across her computer screen and felt a growing sense of dread. As Earth's chief xenopsychology advisor, she had access to classified reports from human colonies across the galaxy, and what she was reading painted a picture that no one had anticipated. The Nightfall incident had been just the beginning. Her secure communication device chimed with an incoming priority call from General Peter Hayes at Earth Command. Helen accepted the connection and watched the general's weathered face appear on her screen. Even through the encrypted channel, she could see the concern in his eyes. "Helen, I need you to walk me through what we're seeing out there," General Hayes said without preamble. "The reports coming in from our colonies don't make sense. Are we really causing this much disruption just by existing?" Helen pulled up her analysis files and began scrolling through incident reports from 17 different star systems. Each one told a similar story of humans accidentally terrorizing other species through perfectly normal behavior. "The pattern is consistent across all our settlements, General. Other species are attributing almost supernatural abilities to any human presence." The first major incident had occurred on Kepler 442b, where a simple trade disagreement had escalated into a diplomatic crisis. Captain Steve Collins had been negotiating grain shipments with the local Vraxian administrator when questions arose about delivery schedules. The administrator had suggested that humans were being unreasonable in their demands. Steve had responded the way any human would. He calmly explained the logical consequences of delayed shipments, outlined alternative solutions, and mentioned that Earth's colonial authority would need to be informed if the contract couldn't be fulfilled. Standard business negotiation from a human perspective, but the Vraxian administrator had seen something entirely different. He witnessed a human who somehow knew exactly which pressure points to apply, who could predict every argument before it was made, and who delivered veiled threats with perfect calm. The administrator capitulated within hours and requested immediate transfer to a different world. "The problem is that we think differently," Helen explained to General Hayes. "Human cognition is based on pattern recognition and adaptive problem solving. When we negotiate, we naturally analyze the other party's position, predict their responses, and adjust our approach accordingly. Other species see this as mind reading. The situation on Tau Ceti Prime had been even more dramatic. Criminal organizations that had operated in the asteroid mining fields for decades had simply abandoned their operations when rumors spread that human security forces were being deployed. No humans had actually been sent to deal with the crime problem, but the mere possibility had been enough to scatter the criminal networks. Helen scrolled through the security footage that had been forwarded to her office. She watched Korathi smugglers literally running from their own operations, leaving behind valuable equipment and cargo. When questioned by local authorities, they spoke of humans who could track anyone across the galaxy, who never forgot a face, and who would pursue criminals to the ends of space. They're not entirely wrong, Helen told the general. Human law enforcement does use advanced tracking techniques, pattern analysis, and persistent investigation methods. But we developed these tools for dealing with human criminals. Applied to alien psychology, they seem almost supernatural. The most concerning incident had occurred on Nexus Station, one of the galaxy's major trading hubs. Captain Steve Collins, the same merchant who had caused problems on Kepler 442b, had been involved in what should have been a routine customs inspection. His cargo manifest had contained some minor discrepancies that station security wanted to investigate. Instead of simply submitting to the inspection, Steve had requested a private meeting with the station commander. This was standard procedure in human space, where face-to-face discussion often resolved bureaucratic problems more efficiently than formal procedures. But Commander Yeltak, a veteran Selenian administrator with 30 years of experience, had found the meeting deeply disturbing. Steve had walked into his office with a calm confidence that suggested he knew exactly how the conversation would go. He had outlined the situation clearly, explained why the inspection was unnecessary, and calmly described what would happen if his crew was detained. "He didn't threaten me," Commander Yeltak had told investigators later, "but somehow I knew that crossing him would be the worst mistake of my career. The way he looked at me, like he could see right through me, like he knew things about me that I don't even know about myself." The security footage showed Steve sitting relaxed in his chair, speaking in a normal tone of voice, occasionally gesturing to make a point. To human eyes, it looked like a standard business meeting. But Commander Yeltak was visibly shaking by the end of the conversation, and he released the human crew immediately. Helen paused the footage and looked at General Hayes through the screen. "This is what we're dealing with. Our natural communication style, our way of analyzing problems and finding solutions, our tendency to remain calm under pressure. All of these normal human traits are being interpreted as evidence of advanced psychological manipulation." More reports kept flowing in from across human space. On the agricultural world of New Montana, human farmers had negotiated water rights with local Korathi settlers. The negotiations had been friendly and productive from the human perspective, but the Korathi had later described feeling like they were being psychologically dissected during the discussions. On the research station, orbiting Volf 359, human, scientists had collaborated with Vraxian researchers on a joint project. The humans had approached the work with their typical flexibility and creative problem-solving, adapting their methods as new data became available. The Vraxian team had interpreted this adaptability as evidence that humans were capable of reshaping reality through pure mental will. "The worst part is that we're not even trying to be intimidating," Helen continued. "These are just normal humans doing normal human things. Farmers negotiating water rights, merchants handling customs problems, scientists working on research projects. But every interaction is being viewed through the lens of the Nightfall incident." General Hayes leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "So what you're telling me is that we've accidentally started a galactic psychological warfare campaign just by being ourselves?" It's worse than that, Helen replied, pulling up her final analysis report. We've become the species that other species have nightmares about. Every human trait that helped us survive on Earth, every aspect of our psychology that makes us adaptable and resilient, is being seen as evidence that we're natural predators. The data was overwhelming. Across 17 star systems in dozens of different situations, the same pattern repeated. Humans would encounter a problem, apply their natural analytical abilities to find a solution, and end up terrifying everyone around them in the process. General, we need to face the possibility that this situation is beyond our control. Helen sighed quietly. We didn't set out to become the galaxy's boogeyman, but that's exactly what's happened. And the worst part is that we're still not entirely sure why. Ambassador Rachel Green had served in diplomatic posts across the galaxy for 2 years, but nothing had prepared her for the crisis she now faced. In her private quarters aboard diplomatic station Harmony, she stared at the encrypted communications that her aide, Lieutenant Ben Adams, had managed to intercept. The messages painted a picture of humanity that was both flattering and deeply troubling. The breakthrough came yesterday, Ben explained as he activated the secure holographic display. I've been monitoring private channels between Galactic Council members for weeks, trying to understand why our diplomatic relations keep deteriorating. What I found goes far beyond what we suspected. The first message appeared in the air between them, its alien script automatically translated by their advanced systems. High Chancellor Vex Toll of the Andromedan Collective had written to his military advisors about recent encounters with human negotiators. The language was formal, but the fear was obvious. The humans have developed psychological warfare to an art form that exceeds our understanding, the message read. They can break an enemy's will without firing a shot, predict responses before they are given, and manipulate entire conversations toward predetermined outcomes. Their tactical thinking suggests cognitive abilities that border on precognitive awareness. Rachel felt her stomach drop as she read the words. She recognized the incident Vex Toll was describing because she had been there. It was a simple trade negotiation where human diplomat Carl Watson had successfully worked out a shipping agreement. Carl had done nothing more than listen carefully, ask thoughtful questions, and propose solutions that benefited both sides. Standard diplomatic procedure. Ben, pull up the next message, she said quietly. The second communication was from the Karathi Defense Ministry, and its tone was even more alarming. Human combat doctrines appear specifically designed to exploit psychological weaknesses across multiple species simultaneously. This level of xenopsychological sophistication suggests either decades of secret research into alien mental patterns or an intuitive understanding of fear that transcends normal cognitive boundaries. Ben highlighted specific sections of the message. As he spoke, they're talking about the rescue mission on Titan Base last month. Captain Lavra Mitchell's team extracted those kidnapped researchers, and apparently the way they handled it has military analysts across the galaxy convinced that we have supernatural tactical abilities. Rachel remembered that mission clearly. Pirates had taken hostages at a remote research facility, and Captain Mitchell had led a small team to get them back. The operation had been textbook human military procedure, using stealth, misdirection, and psychological pressure to force the pirates to surrender without bloodshed. Every human military academy taught those techniques, but the intercepted messages revealed how other species had interpreted the mission. They described humans who seemed to know exactly where every pirate was positioned, who could predict their reactions with perfect accuracy, and who used fear itself as a weapon. One Vraxian military observer had written that watching human soldiers work was like watching predators who had evolved specifically to hunt intelligent prey. The pattern is consistent across all the communications, Ben continued, bringing up message after message. They're not seeing us as just another species with different tactics. They think we're fundamentally different, like we evolved specifically to be psychological predators. A message from the Selenian Strategic Council was particularly revealing. Recommend immediate cessation of all joint military operations with human forces. Their methods achieve desired objectives, but leave participating alien personnel psychologically compromised. Human warfare targets the mind directly, creating trauma that persists long after conflicts end. Rachel realized they were talking about the joint training exercise on Proxima Station, where human and Selenian forces had worked together on anti-piracy operations. The human trainers had used standard psychological conditioning techniques to help alien soldiers deal with combat stress. They had thought they were being helpful. Instead, the alien participants had experienced what they described as mental violation. Human training methods that worked perfectly well on human psychology had unexpected effects on alien minds. The Selenians reported nightmares, anxiety disorders, and persistent feelings of being mentally exposed. "We're not trying to be intimidating," Rachel said, more to herself than to Ben. "Everything they're describing as psychological warfare is just normal human behavior. We analyze situations. We adapt our approach based on feedback. We try to understand how other people think so we can communicate better." Ben nodded grimly and pulled up another set of messages, these ones from civilian administrators rather than military officials. A Karathi trade representative had written to his superiors about negotiations with human merchants. He described the experience as being systematically dissected by people who seemed to understand his motivations better than he understood them. Himself thought the human merchants in question had simply been doing their jobs. They researched their trading partners, learned about different cultural preferences, and adapted their sales approaches accordingly. Basic business practice for humans, but apparently terrifying for species that weren't used to such thorough psychological analysis. "Look at this one," Ben said, highlighting a message from a Vraxian colonial administrator. He's describing a meeting with human settlers who wanted to establish a farming community. According to him, the humans somehow knew exactly what arguments would work, what concerns to address, and how to present their proposal in a way that made refusal impossible. Rachel read the full message and recognized the incident. A group of human families had wanted to start an agricultural settlement on a Vraxian world. They had done their research, learned about Vraxian cultural values, and presented their proposal in terms that emphasized mutual benefit and respect for local customs. The administrator had approved their application enthusiastically. "They made me want to help them," the administrator had written to his colleagues. "Not through threats or bribery, but by somehow making me believe that helping them was my own idea. I have never encountered such sophisticated mental manipulation, and I am concerned about the long-term implications of human settlement in our territory." The most disturbing message came from a Selenian medical researcher who had worked with human doctors on a joint project. Human medical personnel demonstrate an intuitive understanding of alien psychology that surpasses our own understanding of ourselves. They can predict patient responses, anticipate emotional reactions, and provide comfort in ways that suggest they can read minds. I recommend restricting medical cooperation until we understand how they develop these abilities. And they think we're telepathic, Rachel said with growing alarm. They actually believe that human empathy and emotional intelligence are supernatural abilities. More messages revealed the scope of the misunderstanding. Across the galaxy, every human trait that made them good at dealing with other people was being interpreted as evidence of advanced psychological manipulation. Their adaptability was seen as shape-shifting. Their analytical thinking was viewed as mind-reading. Their natural tendency to find common ground was perceived as mental control. The worst part is that we're actually getting better at dealing with alien species, Ben observed. The more we learn about other cultures, the more effective our interactions become. But every success just reinforces their belief that we're some kind of psychological predators. Rachel leaned back in her chair and stared at the communications, floating in the air around them. Humanity had been trying so hard to fit into galactic society, to prove that they could be good neighbors and reliable partners. Instead, they had accidentally convinced everyone that they were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. "Ben, get me a priority channel to Earth Command," she said finally. "We need to discuss how to handle being the most feared species in the galaxy when we never intended to be frightening at all." The Galactic Council Chamber had never hosted such an unusual session. For the first time in Council history, a restricted species had requested permission to address the full assembly. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood at the central podium, looking out at 47 different species who had spent months avoiding any meaningful contact with humanity. The fear in their eyes was still there, but now it was mixed with curiosity. 6 months had passed since the Alliance restrictions were put in place, and the situation had only gotten worse. Human colonies reported increasing isolation, trade. Agreements were being canceled, and some species had begun avoiding star systems with human settlements entirely. Something had to be done, and Earth had decided to take a direct approach. "Honored delegates," Jake began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustic systems. "We gather today to address the fundamental misunderstanding that has shaped our recent relations. Humanity requests this opportunity not to defend our actions, but to explain them." Behind him, a massive holographic display activated, showing detailed brain scans and psychological profiles. Dr. Helen White stepped up to join him at the podium, her research data ready to present. She had spent months preparing for this moment, analyzing human cognitive patterns and comparing them to alien psychology. "What you have interpreted as supernatural tactical ability," Helen said clearly, "is simply human adaptability applied to problem solving. What you see as psychological warfare is our natural approach to understanding and responding to conflict." The chamber remained silent, but Jake could see delegates leaning forward in their seats. This was the first time they had heard humans attempt to explain their behavior rather than simply denying that anything unusual was happening. Helen activated the first set of displays, showing human brain activity during problem-solving tasks. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a world where survival required constant adaptation. Our brains developed to analyze patterns, predict outcomes, and adjust strategies in real time. These abilities are not supernatural. They are evolutionary. A Vraxian delegate raised a crystalline appendage to speak. "You claim these abilities are natural, yet our analysis suggests cognitive capabilities that exceed normal parameters for intelligent species." "That depends on how you define normal," Jake replied. "Every species develops differently based on their evolutionary pressures. Humans faced challenges that required psychological flexibility. We learned to read emotional states because understanding pack dynamics was necessary for survival. We developed pattern recognition because predicting animal behavior meant the difference between eating and starving." Helen brought up comparative data showing how different species had evolved different cognitive strengths. Vraxians excel at mathematical calculations that humans find difficult. Selenians have spatial reasoning abilities that surpass human capacity. Korathi possess memory retention that humans cannot match. Each species developed the mental tools their environment required. The explanation continued with detailed examples of human psychological development. Helen showed how human children learned to read facial expressions and body language from an early age, how they developed empathy through social interaction, and how their problem-solving abilities grew through constant environmental challenges. The difference is that human cognitive evolution focused heavily on understanding other minds, Helen explained. When humans encounter a problem, our first instinct is to analyze the psychological factors involved. We ask ourselves what the other party wants, what they fear, how they think, and how we can find common ground. Captain Lisa Harper joined them at the podium, carrying data from recent human military operations. Our boarding of the Nightfall demonstrates typical human tactical thinking. We studied the ship layout, researched the species involved, predicted their likely responses, and planned accordingly. We used psychological pressure because it achieves objectives with minimal casualties. Lisa activated recordings from the Nightfall operation, showing human soldiers moving through the ship with careful precision. We didn't use supernatural abilities. We used knowledge, preparation, and adaptability. Human soldiers are trained to gather intelligence, understand their enemies, and exploit weaknesses. These are skills, not magic. The alien delegates watched the footage with obvious discomfort, but they were also beginning to understand. A Selenian representative spoke, her voice thoughtful rather than fearful. Your soldiers seem to know exactly how we would react to specific stimuli. How is such prediction possible without telepathic abilities? Because we study you, Jake answered simply. Humans are naturally curious about other cultures. We learn your languages, read your literature, observe your social patterns, and try to understand how you think. This isn't espionage, it's empathy. Helen brought up examples of human cultural research, showing how human diplomats and merchants prepared for alien contact. They studied alien psychology texts, learned about different species' fears and motivations, and adapted their approach accordingly. What aliens saw as mind reading was actually just thorough preparation. The problem is perspective, Helen continued. Most species develop warfare tactics based on physical superiority or technological advantage. Humans developed tactics based on psychological understanding because that's what our evolution required. When we apply these methods to alien conflicts, the results seem supernatural. The breakthrough came when Ambassador Zektar of the Vraxian Confederacy asked the crucial question. If these abilities are natural, why do they have such pronounced effects on other species? Because your species never needed to develop psychological defenses against them, Jake replied. Humans evolved alongside other humans who used similar tactics. We developed mental resistance through constant exposure. Other species evolved different challenges and different solutions. Dr. Helen White activated her final presentation, showing detailed psychological profiles of different species. Each of your species has cognitive strengths that humans find overwhelming. Vraxian mathematical thinking can solve problems that leave humans completely confused. Selenian spatial reasoning operates on levels that humans cannot comprehend. Our psychological abilities have similar effects on your minds. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates began talking among themselves in dozens of languages. For the first time since the restrictions were imposed, the fear was beginning to transform into understanding. This brings us to our proposal, Jake said, calling for attention. Rather than enforcing isolation, we suggest controlled integration. Let us teach you our methods. Let us show you that human tactical thinking, while different, is not inherently malicious. Captain Lisa Harper outlined the specific proposal. Humans would establish joint training programs where alien personnel could experience human psychological tactics in controlled environments. They would share their decision-making processes, demonstrate their analytical methods, and help other species understand rather than fear human thinking. We propose the Human Psychological Integration Protocol, Jake announced. Instead of hiding our abilities, we will openly demonstrate our thought processes. We will show you how humans analyze problems, predict responses, and find solutions. Knowledge removes fear. The vote was closer than anyone expected. 31 species voted in favor, 14 opposed, and 2 abstained. It was not the overwhelming support that Jake had hoped for. but it was enough to begin the process of integration. As the session concluded, Jake noticed something important in the faces around him. The fear was still there, but it was now accompanied by curiosity, respect, and in some cases, genuine interest in learning. Other species were beginning to see humans not as monsters, but as teachers. "Think it will work?" Lisa asked as they prepared to leave the chamber. Jake smiled as he watched alien delegates approaching human representatives with questions instead of avoiding them. "We are humans," he said confidently. "We adapt.